It was just past midnight when Jamal Reed's world ripped apart in an instant. The night sky above him, once calm and comforting, was now drowned out by the violent strobe of red and blue lights. They flashed like some kind of cruel, endless alarm clock that wouldn't let him sleep, no matter how hard he tried to push it away. The hum of the city, distant, detached, seemed to fall away, as if the entire world was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Jamal stood frozen outside his small recording studio in downtown Chicago. The air felt thick, suffocating, and it was as if the weight of it was pressing down on him, squeezing the life out of his every movement. His palms were facing forward, empty, and his hands trembling ever so slightly as they hovered in the air. That gesture, just that simple act of surrender, was supposed to protect him. But deep down, Jamal knew better. There was no shield here. No defense. "I didn't do anything. I work here," he said, his voice cutting through the tension, steady but thick with a fear he refused to let show. But the officer didn't even flinch. The flashlight in his hand flickered, glaring into Jamal's eyes with an intensity that felt like it could burn him alive. His other hand, suddenly, terrifyingly, rested on the grip of the gun holstered at his waist. The subtle yet unmistakable threat of escalation hanging in the air like a loaded gun. Jamal's heart hammered in his chest, each beat deafening in his ears. "Hands where I can see them. Turn around," came the command, sharp and cold. The officer's voice cut through the night like a blade, chilling and indifferent. Jamal had learned long ago that arguing, shouting, or pleading would only make things worse. A lifetime of seeing it happen to others had taught him that. So he complied, slowly, carefully, not trusting his own movements. His breath hitched as the officer yanked him hard, slamming him up against the gritty brick wall of the studio. The pain from the impact burned into his cheek, sharp and hot, but Jamal bit down on it, swallowing the cry that threatened to escape. "Why are you arresting me?" Jamal asked, his voice trembling, even though he fought to keep it steady. His pulse pounded in his throat. His mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. The cold, biting metal of the handcuffs clamped down on his wrists, each click louder than the last. He wasn't even given the chance to breathe. The officer's sneer twisted his face into something that could have been rage or indifference. Jamal couldn't tell. All he saw was the flashing lights, the blinding glare, and the shadow of something much darker taking shape. "You fit the description," the officer spat, the words dripping from his mouth like venom. Those 4 words. It wasn't just a phrase. It was a verdict. It was a sentence handed down before Jamal's day had even begun. He had heard it 100 times, from friends, cousins, neighbors. It was a sentence handed down to anyone who wasn't white, to anyone who dared to walk in a world where they didn't belong, to anyone who was seen as dangerous because of the color of their skin. Guilty, by association, by nothing more than existing in the wrong place, at the wrong time. The surrounding scene blurred as the flashing lights bathed the street in red and blue. Neighbors peered from behind curtains, some of them eyes wide with concern, others resigned. They had seen it all before. It wasn't shocking. It wasn't even new. And yet, it never failed to wound. It never stopped the ache that went deep into your bones. As Jamal was shoved into the back of the squad car, his mind was a blur of fear and anger, but mostly it was filled with a haunting thought that clawed at the back of his mind, impossible to push away. Was this going to be his story too? Would his name be added to that growing list? Eric Garner, Philando Castile, George Floyd, a chorus of voices that would forever echo in history, their lives reduced to mere headlines. Would he become a statistic? A symbol of injustice? A victim of a system that saw him only for the color of his skin? He swallowed hard, fighting back the wave of panic that threatened to choke him. No, he wasn't one of them. He had done nothing wrong. He had to believe that. It had to count for something, right? The car ride to the precinct was agonizingly silent, save for the occasional static-filled crackle from the police radio. Jamal sat alone in the back seat, his wrists aching, the handcuffs digging into his skin with every breath. His thoughts spun in circles, a vortex of rage, confusion, and fear. He wanted to scream, to demand answers, but deep down he knew it was pointless. At this moment, he wasn't a man. He wasn't even a human being. He was a suspect, a faceless, nameless thing, and suspects don't get the benefit of the doubt. The lights were flashing, the sirens blaring, and somewhere in the distance, Jamal could already hear the sound of his name being written into history, but he wasn't ready to become just another story. Not yet. Jamal Reed had always been a dreamer. It was something that had been drilled into him since he was young. People always told him he had his head in the clouds, that he needed to come down to earth and get real. But Jamal had never been one to listen to doubters. At 28, he had already built a name for himself in the competitive world of music production. He wasn't just another faceless producer lost in the shuffle. No, Jamal was carving out a space for himself, a place where talent wasn't defined by a polished resume or a fancy label, but by raw, undeniable passion. His studio, though small and tucked away in a forgotten warehouse in the heart of Chicago, had become a haven, a lighthouse in a stormy sea for young artists trying to make it. It wasn't glamorous, not by any stretch of the imagination, but it was real. It was a space where people, kids especially, could come and be heard. Jamal had made it his mission to give them the same shot he had fought for. He had turned that rundown, unkempt place into a symbol of hope. That morning, the world outside felt still, like the calm before a storm. Jamal's alarm clock hummed softly, a sound that slowly pulled him from his dreams. The faint rumble of traffic from the busy city street below filtered through his apartment window, marking the start of another long day. The sun was barely peeking over the horizon, casting a warm orange glow across his small, cluttered room. He could feel the promise of the day creeping in, pushing away the last remnants of sleep. Stretching, he rubbed the sleep from his eyes, feeling the weight of exhaustion in his bones. But it was the kind of tiredness that came with progress, with momentum. The kind of tiredness you earned by chasing after something bigger than yourself. A quiet smile tugged at his lips as he walked toward the kitchen to brew his morning coffee. The aroma filled the apartment, grounding him, reminding him that this was real. Today was a big day. Too big, he thought, as his mind raced. A studio session with an up-and-coming rapper whose raw talent could turn heads. A meeting with David Carson, a local philanthropist, someone who had heard about Jamal's work and wanted to help take his studio to the next level. And then, later that evening, a community event Jamal had promised to attend, one where he'd talk about using music as a tool for change, the kind of work that had become his heartbeat. He was ready. After a quick breakfast, Jamal grabbed his worn leather bag. It was an old friend, filled with everything he needed, notebooks filled with ideas, USB drives with unfinished tracks, cables for every possible scenario. As he stood in the hallway, preparing to step out the door, he caught a glimpse of his reflection in the cracked mirror. His t-shirt was crisp, white against his dark jeans, and his walk, his stride, had a kind of quiet confidence that spoke volumes. He wasn't just a producer. He was someone who believed in the power of music to change lives, to make a difference, and that belief was what set him apart. The day moved faster than he could keep up with. By mid-afternoon, Jamal found himself sitting across from David Carson at a small, quiet cafe near the studio. Carson was a well-known philanthropist, an older man with a sharp mind and a reputation for giving back to the community. He'd heard about Jamal's work, about the artists he mentored, the kids he helped get off the streets, and he was interested in getting involved. "Your studio is doing something special," Carson said, stirring his coffee slowly, his eyes fixed on Jamal as if weighing him. "You're giving these kids a chance to channel their energy into something positive. That's rare." Jamal's chest swelled with pride. He had heard similar praise before, but coming from Carson, it felt different. It felt like a breakthrough. "That's the goal," Jamal replied, his voice steady though his heart raced. "Music saved me when I was their age. Now I want to pay it forward." Carson's eyes softened as though he could see the depth of Jamal's passion, the fire that burned behind every note he produced. The meeting stretched longer than planned, but it didn't matter. Jamal hung on every word, every detail. By the time they shook hands, Carson had promised to come by the studio the following week to finalize the details. The investment that would take Jamal's dream to the next level was within reach. Jamal left the cafe feeling lighter than he had in months. This was it, This was the moment he had been working for, the breakthrough he'd dreamed about for so long. He hadn't made it yet, but the door was finally opening. As he walked back toward the studio, the weight of the day seemed to melt away. He was on the edge of something big. He could feel it in his bones. The day ahead would be full of challenges, but Jamal was ready. There was no turning back now. His dreams were no longer just that. Dreams. They were becoming reality. But as he approached the entrance to the studio, a strange sense of unease settled in the pit of his stomach, like a warning he couldn't quite shake. The smile that had been tugging at his lips faltered for a moment, but he shook it off, telling himself it was just nerves. What he didn't know was that by the time the sun set that day, his world would come crashing down around him, and nothing, not even his dream, would ever be the same again. It was 10:45 p.m. when Jamal Reed wrapped up a late-night session with Malik, a 16-year-old rapper who had found his only escape in the studio. The boy, barely out of adolescence, had been drowning in the chaos of his life, grappling with failing grades, evading the street life that seemed to chase him at every turn, and trying to make sense of a world that constantly seemed to be pulling him under. But music had been his lifeline. With every beat he laid down, every rhyme that came to life in the silence of the studio, Malik found a sliver of peace, a brief escape from the constant storm surrounding him. Jamal saw that same hunger in Malik, the same spark of raw talent he'd recognized in himself when he was a teenager, struggling against the current of his own circumstances. "Keep at it," Jamal said, his voice deep, calm, but full of belief as Malik packed up his notebook and headphones. "You've got something special. Don't waste it." Malik nodded, his face breaking into a shy smile that was a rare moment of warmth for a kid who carried so much weight on his shoulders. "Thanks, Mr. Reed. I'll be back next week." Jamal watched him leave, feeling a swell of pride. The words were like a promise, like a weight that Malik would carry with him, a reminder that someone believed in him. It was a feeling Jamal had grown accustomed to in the studio, a space that had become more than just a place of work. It was a sanctuary, a refuge for those searching for a way out, for a way up. He locked the door behind him, his fingers lingering on the cold metal, savoring the simple satisfaction of ownership. This was his space, a place he had built from the ground up. It wasn't much, bare walls, mismatched equipment, the constant hum of old wiring, but it was his, and it meant something. Jamal stepped outside, pulling his jacket tighter around him against the cool night air. The streetlights above flickered, casting long, jagged shadows on the cracked pavement beneath his feet. The world seemed to slow down, the city holding its breath as if something were about to happen. He pulled out his phone, scanning through messages, some about an upcoming community event, others about potential collaborations, but the fleeting sense of calm was quickly shattered by a noise that sliced through the night, the sharp crack of glass, a loud crash, footsteps pounding, racing down the street, followed by the harsh sound of shouting voices. Jamal's heart skipped a beat. His body froze. He didn't even have time to react before a group of young men appeared from the shadows, their figures dark and fast, moving in a frantic blur through the dimly lit street. They were carrying stolen electronics, laptops, phones, flat-screen TVs, clutched tightly in their hands, their faces twisted in panic. One of them tripped, dropping a flat-screen TV. It smashed to the ground with a deafening crack, the screen splitting open in jagged lines, its shattered pieces scattering across the pavement. And then it hit him. Jamal's breath caught in his throat. His blood ran cold. He recognized one of them. His gut twisted. "Malik, what are you doing?" Jamal's voice was thick with disbelief, the words tumbling out before his brain could fully process what he was seeing. But Malik didn't stop, didn't turn around. He just kept running, his body merging with the rest of the group as they scattered into the night, disappearing into the darkness like smoke. Jamal's pulse pounded in his ears, his body frozen in place. His mind scrambled to catch up with the chaos unfolding before him. This can't be happening. Not Malik. Not him. He can't be involved in this. The boy who had just been in his studio, speaking about his dreams of escape, of making something better for himself, now a part of the very violence he had been trying to protect him from. Before Jamal could even process the scene, the high-pitched screech of sirens sliced through the night. Police cars raced to the scene, their flashing lights a blur of red and blue, their engines roaring like a freight train in the night. Officers spilled out of the vehicles, weapons drawn, their movements coordinated and swift. It all happened so fast, everything colliding into one chaotic blur. "Stop!" A voice barked from the commotion, sharp and demanding. The group of thieves scattered like startled animals, fleeing into the darkness. But Jamal, standing frozen in the middle of it all, had no chance to move. The spotlight of the scene had already turned on him. His phone, still clutched in his hand, slipped from his fingers and hit the ground with a soft thud, the sound oddly insignificant against the madness unfolding around him. His mind raced, trying to process everything in real time. The urgency, the fear, the shock. His heart hammered in his chest. Why? "Don't move!" Another officer shouted, his voice icy, cold as steel. Jamal could feel the weight of the officer's gun trained directly on him, the officer's hand steady as the barrel pointed directly at his chest. Jamal's breath caught in his throat. His eyes darted around, searching for an escape, but there was nowhere to run. No way out. "I'm not with them!" Jamal shouted, his hands instinctively rising in surrender. His voice cracked with panic, his mind screaming for clarity, for them to understand. "I work here. This is my studio." But the officer didn't respond. His face was a mask of indifference, his eyes like cold steel. There was no hesitation. The handcuffs snapped shut around Jamal's wrists with a sound that reverberated through the night air like the clink of chains in a dungeon. The cold bite of metal sank into his skin, but it was nothing compared to the weight of the betrayal twisting through his gut. This wasn't just any night. This was the night his dream, his sanctuary, had been tainted. The place he had poured his heart into, where young people came to escape, to find a way out of their struggles, was now the backdrop of something dark. The flashing lights of the squad car bathed the studio in a sickly, artificial glow, casting long, grotesque shadows over the walls. His body moved mechanically, dragged forward by the officer's force, his mind struggling to keep up. Each step away from the studio felt like another piece of his soul being torn away. He was being marched away from everything he had worked for, the place that had given him purpose. Why Malik? He thought. Why now? His body felt heavy as though every step dragged him further away from the life he had built. The flashing lights lit up the entrance to the studio, turning the sanctuary of his dreams into something tainted, something twisted. His world spun, disorienting him, the reality of the situation settling in with a weight that was impossible to ignore. And as the door of the squad car slammed shut behind him, the cold metal enclosing him in darkness, Jamal knew this was only the beginning. Jamal sat in the sterile, suffocating silence of the interrogation room, his wrists still bound in the cold, unforgiving metal cuffs. The weight of them felt like an anchor, dragging him deeper into the center of a storm he couldn't escape. His shoulders throbbed from the rough treatment, the painful shove into the back of the squad car still fresh in his memory. He had been pulled from the safety of his studio, where he had built a life of purpose and meaning, and thrust into a world that felt foreign, hostile. The small room was a prison in itself, its walls closing in on him with every passing second. The metal table in front of him felt like it was pressing into his chest, an unforgiving reminder of his vulnerability. Above him, a single bulb flickered intermittently, casting long, eerie shadows that stretched across the walls like ghosts trying to pull him into their cold, dark embrace. The silence in the room was thick, heavy with the weight of unspoken judgment. It seemed to press down on him, suffocating every thought, every breath. He wasn't sure how much longer he could hold it together. Then, the door creaked open, and the sound of footsteps sliced through the tension in the air. 2 officers entered, their presence filling the room, turning it into something far more dangerous than it already was. Their steps were deliberate, calculated, echoing off the hard, impersonal floor as they approached him. The first officer carried a clipboard, his expression unreadable, but there was a sharpness in his eyes that made Jamal's stomach churn. The second officer, taller and broader, with an unsettling gaze, leaned against the wall, his arms crossed in front of his chest. His posture was predatory, the way a lion might size up its prey, calculating, waiting for the right moment to pounce. His eyes locked onto Jamal with a cold intensity that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. Jamal felt exposed, naked under the weight of that gaze, like everything he was, everything he stood for, was being judged in that moment. The officer with the clipboard broke the silence, his voice flat but heavy with authority. "Let's make this simple," he said, his words cold, calculated. "What were you doing at the scene?" Jamal exhaled slowly, trying to steady his breathing, to push back against the rising tide of panic and frustration that threatened to consume him. His heart raced in his chest, but he forced himself to remain calm, to hold on to whatever shred of control he could. "I wasn't at any scene. I was locking up my studio. I worked there. I've been there all night." The officer's eyes narrowed, and his lips curled into a faint, mocking smirk. His fingers flipped through the papers on his clipboard with a deliberate slowness, as if savoring the moment. "Funny," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Witnesses say they saw you with the suspects. Running." Jamal's jaw tightened, a wave of frustration rising up in him. He gripped the edge of the table, his fingers digging into the cold metal, as if he could ground himself, as if he could stop the flood of emotions threatening to break through. His fists clenched, the cuffs biting into his skin as he fought to control the surge of anger that threatened to overwhelm him. "That's not true," he snapped, his voice rising involuntarily, betraying his growing frustration. "I didn't run. I didn't do anything wrong." The officer with the clipboard leaned in closer, his eyes narrowing with calculated suspicion, studying Jamal's every movement. He could see the crack in Jamal's calm exterior, the flicker of anger, the tightening of his fists. The officer's expression didn't change, but the way he leaned in just a little closer made Jamal feel even more exposed, even more trapped. "Funny," he repeated, his tone now thick with mockery, "because those same witnesses said they saw you run with them, and now you're here, trying to convince me you had nothing to do with it?" Before Jamal could respond, the second officer, who had been silently studying him from across the room, let out a low, almost amused chuckle. The sound sent a chill down Jamal's spine. The officer's eyes flickered briefly to his partner before locking back onto Jamal with an unnerving intensity, as if trying to unravel him with nothing more than a look. "You fit the description, though," the officer said, his voice low and gravelly, like a rumble from deep within the earth. "Black male, mid-20s, dark clothing. Sound familiar?" Jamal's stomach twisted, his chest tightening with the weight of those words. Fit the description. He had heard those words so many times before, but never directed at him. Not like this. It was the phrase, the code that had been used to justify the countless injustices he had seen, on the streets, on the news, in the lives of the people he had grown up with. He had heard it all before, but never like this. The lazy assumptions, the predetermined guilt, the quickness to place the blame on someone who looked like him, who fit the mold. He could feel the weight of history bearing down on him. He clenched his fists harder, fighting the anger that surged through him. The cuffs dug into his skin as if to remind him that no matter how much he resisted, he was still bound by their expectations. "Those are vague descriptions," Jamal said, his voice shaking with a mix of anger and disbelief. He forced the words out through gritted teeth. "It could be half the men in my neighborhood. You can't just—" The officer with the clipboard cut him off, his voice sharp and dismissive. "Vague descriptions?" he barked. "Vague descriptions don't land you in here. The way you reacted, your presence at the scene, your reluctance to cooperate, it all paints a picture, a very clear one." Jamal's breath hitched, a wave of helplessness washing over him. He could feel the walls closing in, the weight of their accusations suffocating him. He was trying to hold on to the truth, trying to make them see reason, but it was slipping through his fingers like sand. It didn't matter what he said. They had already made up their minds. They weren't listening. They were just waiting for him to crack, to give them something they could use against him. The second officer, who had been leaning against the wall, now pushed himself off the wall and stepped closer to Jamal, his presence looming over him like a shadow. His footsteps were slow and deliberate, each one echoing in Jamal's ears. The officer's shadow stretched across the table, swallowing Jamal whole. "So, why don't you tell us, Mr. Reed?" he said, his voice low and dripping with disdain. "Why were you really there? What's your connection to these thieves?" Jamal's chest tightened, the question sinking into him like a weight he couldn't escape. His mind raced, but his body remained still. He thought of Malik, the boy he had tried to help, the kid he had tried to guide. He thought of the hope he had seen in Malik's eyes just hours ago, the words of encouragement he had given him, and now, here he was, sitting in this cold room, being interrogated like a criminal. He opened his mouth, wanting to shout the truth, to tell them everything, but the words didn't come. What was the point? They wouldn't believe him. They hadn't believed him from the start. He wasn't a man in their eyes. He was just another suspect, a faceless figure to be processed and discarded. His heart pounded in his chest, but his body remained frozen, locked in place by the weight of their judgment. The officer's question hung in the air, suffocating him, pressing down on his chest. Jamal felt like he was drowning in it, unable to breathe, unable to think. He opened his mouth again, but this time the words came out in a whisper. "I don't know anything about the robbery. I was just locking up my studio. You can check the cameras, you can talk to anyone in the neighborhood. I didn't do anything wrong." The officer with the clipboard didn't respond immediately. Instead, he exchanged a glance with his partner, the silent communication passing between them like a secret code. Jamal could see it in their eyes. Their minds were already made up. They weren't interested in the truth. They had already decided who he was, and nothing he said could change that. And at that moment, Jamal knew. No matter how many times he told them the truth, no matter how many times he explained himself, it wouldn't matter. They had already decided. He wasn't a man. He wasn't a human being. He was just a suspect, a problem to be solved. If you enjoyed this story and want to find out what happens next, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. There are many exciting events, unexpected twists, and deep reflections ahead. Join us so you don't miss a single chapter of this story. Your likes and comments are our support. And for you, new episodes every time you tune in. Subscribe and stay with us.